Excellent. Thank you so much for signing up for this course. I'm delighted again to give you another little snippet. This is thanks to C-19 and all of us being in lockdown. And so for today, what I wanted to focus on, in my usual way of teaching, I riff and I try to respond to what's happening right now, right here in the real world that is often stinky and pussy and messy and goopy and nasty. Right now, everywhere in the world, we have Black Lives Matters going on. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about intersectionality. Sometimes for students, when they're beginning their journey of learning and responding to issues, they have the privilege, I'm sure you've had this situation, Carlene, where you have one topic, poverty, and you have 12 weeks to write a 10-page essay on poverty. Of course, in the real world, people don't segment who they are into tiny, tidy little chunks. They have everything going on at the same time. So we have this idea of intersectionality, which is really important when we're doing counseling, when we're responding to things going on in the world. Black Lives Matters is giving priority, let's say, in this moment to the issue of racism, of structural racism, historic racism, indisputable racism, 500 years of slavery, indigenous oppression, theft of land, oppressive justice systems, the colonial gaze, all of this stuff going on at the same time. A little expression you might want to hang on to: I don't live in the past lives in me. So I don't live, let's say, in the past of slavery, but slavery is still here right now in terms of there's echoes of it or there's ripples of it. Wealthy white people in America or Canada or elsewhere, their great-great-great-grandparents may have stolen land. They may have benefited from the plantation system. And there may be black people right now today around us who are still disadvantaged from things that happened 50 years or 500 years ago. It's not like it's done, right? It's not like, okay, we had a smudging ceremony and we're done. Everybody's equal now. Or, we had Obama as president. We're done. It's not as simple as that. People have assets, that, internal personal assets that they bring with them everywhere they go, and they have perceived assets that go with them everywhere they go. So for example, what I mean by perceived assets is I have white skin and I can walk around in a mall and be less likely to be thought of as a thief. If I walked around with black skin in the same mall doing the same things, I might be perceived as a thief, right? Or a shoplifter, up to no good. So I wanted to make that idea that there's one, the longitudinal story of our individual lives and our collective lives, and then there's the perceptions of things. So the flip side, there could be a very wealthy black person walking around the mall, right? And there could be a dirt poor white person walking around the mall, right? So it's not just what we know ourselves to be inside, but how we are perceived by others. It's the relationship, the intersection space, intersectionality. It's also the idea I wanted to put into this little video today of intersectionality is race, class, gender, age, sexuality, many aspects of who each of us are at any given moment. So in this moment, you and I are engaged with each other as teacher-student, two people in female-looking bodies, two white-skinned-looking people. We're engaged with those identity pegs.
Yeah.
Okay? There's also the identity pegs of employer, employee, old lady, young lady, right? There's a whole bunch of different constructs that are
different ethnic backgrounds,
right.
assuming.
And these shape who we are, and it shapes who we are perceived to be. Right? So I'll list a couple of mine, and maybe you could share with our audience some of your identity pegs. So I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, a worker, a feminist. I'm white bush trash being recycled, but I could also be thought of as middle class in that I've had a job. I've had a job all my life. Always have a job. I have 2 jobs, 5 jobs. But that's a privilege, but it's also a burden, right? I'm a scholar, I'm an activist, I'm bisexual, I'm a vegan, I'm 5'3", I'm curvaceous and pudgy. Give me some of your identity pegs.
I too am a daughter. I am an aunt to a very adorable 2-year-old. I'm a student. I'm a academic. I'm a writer. I'm a photographer. I'm a little bit of a poet.
A horse fan?
A horse fan.
Yeah.
Very pro-animal person, I guess. I'm a plant mom.
Yeah. So all of these different identity pegs, sometimes students will just list a whole bunch of stuff, right? You just list a whole bunch of stuff. I don't care about the list. What's important is the interface. So let's say if you are a cattle rancher and you make your living by raising calves and cows and then butchering them, and I'm a vegan animal rights activist, and we're at a dinner party where I'm wanting to eat my tofu, and you're upset because people aren't buying beef. This is salient. This matters. In that moment, this is an identity peg we each have facing each other that has consequence in terms of comfort or discomfort or relationship building.
Yeah.
Right? In maybe 100 other contexts, whether I'm a vegan and you're an animal harvester, it has no consequence.
Like our position on shoe wear.
Right, shoe wear. Exactly. Okay, so it isn't just to list them, it's of the significance. So if you were a black client who is sexually assaulted by a white man, and you come to my agency and you're looking at me as a white woman, the skin color identity pegs we have in that moment are salient. On a subconscious or conscious level, you might be thinking, maybe this counselor isn't going to believe me. Maybe she's going to align with the white guy who hurt me. Right? So it isn't just to list them, these identity pegs. The quest we have as helpers is to reflect on how do these maybe have meanings in which moments in my interactions with these clients or these communities or this situation. And the onus is on me as the social worker helper person to initiate those conversations. So to say to you, so thank you for coming here today for counseling, and I want to be helpful to you, and I wish to build trust and respect and empathy between us. And I'm curious, what might it mean to you to be working with me, a white woman? Because my understanding is that many black women have experienced racism, and you might feel uncomfortable. You might feel cautious. You might not feel that I'm going to fully see your world. What can I do to help? You see? Right? It's not to just list it. It's so what? Right?
Yeah, exactly. You putting it in context.
In context, in the moment, and it's our responsibility to be mindful of that from the client's perspective. It's not for the client to initiate that conversation of, hey, white lady, how do you understand my life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, what I wish us to get from this today, Black Lives Matter, that's a big thing going on right now. It is a parallel for us here in terms of Indigenous issues too. It's for us to initiate conversations around that and to be mindful and to be informed. Intersectionality to me means reflecting on all of those identity pegs we all have and to ponder how do they interface in any given moment in terms of working with victims of abuse, social work with victims of abuse. And then I also want to put into the conversation the idea of life cycle aspects. So, I was born white bush trash, I was born white bush trash. Later I was white bush trash trying to recycle myself, trying to build a life, right? Then I came to have an identity sense of myself as blue-collar, dignified, blue-collar workers, starting to resist that labeling that was put on me and my community of white bush trash, or mining community, fisher folk community, people who are rural poor and living like hillbillies, right? Resisting it. And then the dignity of work, the dignity of who I was. That was a next step for me. Reading about Marxism and socialism and depression and resisting it all. I got some empowerment, got some attitude, got a little bit of like, hey, fuck you companies who are exploiting all the workers, right? So that's the thing. Then, now here I am middle class, you could say, because I've had a job all these years, and now I have a good job for the last 23 years as an academic. Okay? We won't talk today about my $60,000 student loans and my bankruptcy. That's another day. That's another day. But the life cycle. So today, how would you talk about yourself in terms of class issues?
I would say that I'm kind of on the brink between like being poor and being middle class, where sometimes I have money and sometimes I don't, because being a student means that a lot of the time I don't have the time to work or commit hours to a job that I think would be really meaningful. So I can't keep a full-time job, and therefore I have to settle, kind of. And then during the school year, because of that, I don't have money, and then over the summer I do. So there's always an imbalance, I guess.
Okay. Some people call that precarious, like living a precarious economic life, and aspirational. So it sounds like you identify more towards a middle class worldview. But if, honestly, I don't want to break your heart here or shock you, but you're poor.
Oh yeah.
You're poor, okay? Having known you now for a few months, you're poor.
My bank account knows.
Her car breaks down and she has no money to fix it, and she's got to go fix it herself, and it's an old shabby car and stuff like that, okay?
We gotta do what we gotta do.
Yeah, I don't want to like ruin your day. Like, oh no, I'm working poor. You are. You're precarious, working poor. But that sense of what matters is how you identify. If you tell me, if you were my client, you say I identify as middle class, right? My mission is to maybe help you explore that, but it's not for me to say, no, you're not. Right? I can take the liberty to say that with you because we know each other and you have a sense of humor, and I know a lot of the details, and you're not my client, and I know you're an enlightened person, you know, finishing your degree, and not you, right? Like, you get what I mean by all that, right? So the life cycle aspects. A person can be raised a certain way and hang on to that. Even when they're 60 years old. I still identify as white bush trash being recycled. I still have anxiety about paychecks, or when I put my plastic, even if I've been at home and I look and it's payday, and I look at on my computer on my paycheck, and I know, well, I got money in my bank. I got money in my bank, and I go to buy groceries and I put in the card, I still go, it's still there. Right? So I wanted to just for today make that mention. Intersectionality is how a person perceives themselves and the relationship with others, and that self-perception can be also fluid during the life cycle. My husband died 3 months and 2 weeks ago. I still am married to him. I am still his wife. But I'm also a widow. But someone could say I'm single. But I'm like, no. But yes, but no, but, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, what I'm expressing is our identities can be fluid and kind of mucky.
And change based on how you're looking at it.
And change in the moment. I gave birth to a child when I was 19, so biologically I'm a mother. Legally, he was adopted the day he was born, so I have no child. But it was an open adoption in that I had contact with him till he was 16. So I was kind of a mother on Saturdays, and we'd go shopping and we'd go to restaurants, but I wasn't a mother when I was Monday, Tuesday. I was in a relationship 2 times in my life with people who had children, and so I was a stepmother. But then when one of those 13-year relationship, the day it ended, I was no longer a stepmother. Right? So again, I give you that identity peg that a person, there's legal definitions of an identity peg, but there's also the person themselves. As social worker helpers, we go with the person themselves. I'll give another example. A person could be legally not indigenous. They could be a person with no status card. But if they identify as indigenous, if they grew up in a family where they felt indigenous, where they spoke Cree, or where they feel they look indigenous and it is meaningful to them, the culture, the identity, so on, that's true for them and that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they have a legal identity card.
Yeah.
Right, or status card.
I know that you had mentioned that, but I guess kind of similar was in your book there. They talked about how Métis people can sometimes identify as Michif people because that's their language rather than a legal definition that just excludes.
Well, excellent example, yeah. So in the book, Fire Jane Gravelin's book here, some people would say, well, they're not really indigenous, but what matters is any person in front of you, how do they identify? If they say, I identify as Catholic, I've met people who say, I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic. Do you believe in abortion? Yeah, under some circumstances. I'm Catholic. Do you believe in divorce? Yeah, under some circumstances. Do you believe in gay people being able to live their lives fully as gay people, full of love, and being able to marry and have all the rights and status of everyone? Oh, yes, but I'm Catholic. Oh, right? So, So, do you believe in birth control, abortion, right? People may say, I identify as Catholic. And then you ask them 20 questions, and they may think, you may look at them and say, well, that's a kind of odd Catholic worldview if you agree with all these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to establish with each person we're working with, what does it mean to them when they say, I'm Métis, I'm Catholic, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, I'm bisexual, I'm a widow, married, mother. Part of our task is to ask them and explore what those identity pegs mean to them at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is part of the healing journey. For us to be able to see them in their full, unique personhood. It has consequences in terms of building trust and empathy and helping them explore their world, which is part of the whole healing journey. And it's their perceptions that matter, not the legal facts, not the facts as a police officer might give them, because we're not police officers, we're social workers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to know that that's always kind of fluid. It's always in motion.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell you a story. I worked for 3 years as a therapist in an acute care social assault treatment program. And a young woman came to me, and she wanted to talk about something that had happened to her. Her father, whom she loved her father, she loved her mom, she loved her family, happy life, happy everything. When she was 14, her father wanted to teach her to drive. She was excited about this. Her dad's going to teach her to drive. Her dad takes her driving down these old roads, and she's learning how to drive, and she's feeling very happy and joyous and empowered. At one point, her dad reaches over, puts his hand down her blouse onto her breast, and clearly, unambiguously grabs her breast and starts moving it. She's mortified. She's horrified. She's absolutely shocked. She jumps out of the car, walks home. She can't deal with this. She just, like, it blew the top of her head off because she had never imagined her father to do anything like that, ever.
Mm-hmm.
She was sexually assaulted. She was crushed by this. She felt betrayed by this. She would never be alone with her dad anymore. She didn't want to talk about this to anybody else in her family. Her mother and her brothers were asking, what's going on here? Why are the two of you no longer talking? She felt this was a horrible, horrible thing, right? Legally, do we have a sexual assault here? A cop may say no. A cop may say, a judge may say, we have no evidence it ever happened. We have no DNA. We have, when you watch the cop shows, they're always looking for evidence. Was this on video? No, it's her word against her father's, and she feels crushed, right? So this is what we work with, what the client tells us. It happened. I believe that it happened. My role is to help her figure out what next. What do you want to do or say? How are you going to process this? What next? Right? It's not for me to make decisions about it. It's not for me to define it. Right? Because you could imagine 30, 50 years ago as someone saying, well, big deal. Right? She wasn't bleeding. She didn't have bruises. Right? But we know if you really feel her world and you understood how this changed everything from her world. She'd never had a bad thing happen to her in her life, right? And then we also have other clients who they've had 100 bad things happen to them, and they're pretty resilient. They're pretty, right? It's not for me to say, well, you should be suicidal and depressed over this. If they're feeling resilient, a client might come to you and say, I want you to help me. My landlord is sexually harassing me. I think he's a creep and an asshole. I want to move out. Can you help me move out? Help me find another apartment. Help me find my first and last month's rent. This is what she has identified as the problem that she wants to work on today. This is what we're going to work on. Right? That may sound kind of obvious, but some agencies, sometimes some clients, they come and they ask you for help with a thing, and you may imagine this other thing is more important. We stay with their definition. So intersectionality, go with the person's story, believe them what they say, know that it's always fluid. So what I wanted to also speak a little bit about today is this I'm going to call this a documentary, the movie Precious. For the purposes of this course, this is a profound, we'll call this a case study. I invite you all to go online and see if you can rent this, if you can get the book Precious, if you can find out more about it. I've watched this documentary 9 times now, 10 times now. I'm always seeing new aspects of it. And what I can put into the conversation for right now. Have you had a chance to watch this yet?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, so in this, it's a very famous movie. Part of why it's famous is it explicates so many aspects of trauma. So we see the main character, Precious, at first, at the very beginning, her whole life has been about being sexually abused, being oppressed by her mom. She's had every horrific thing happen that can happen, pretty much. And we feel so horrible for her. But at different moments, her priority is to get a meal, to get, we see at one point she steals some French fries or something like that, right? She makes an order of food, she eats the food, and then she runs. So in that moment, that's what she wanted help with. If we had said to her, oh, your math skills aren't very strong, or, you know, your fashion skills, or your consciousness of how to dress appropriately for a job interview, that's not what she wants to talk about on that day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are some of the other things that you took from watching this about Precious, the main character?
I guess just like the scope of systematic oppression. Because I think that a lot of the time there's a lot of movies that'll show you one person and how they're systematically oppressed, but they don't show you necessarily how that affects the people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that this did a really good job of showing that it's not just one person who gets the downside of it, it's multiple people, but in varying degrees, and to compare the trauma for any of them isn't, it's not fair at all, and it's not going to result in much, but I think if you look at all of them, you get a really good picture
of how it intersects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is so well said. Like the intersectionality. So if we took the main characters, there's Precious,
Yep.
and then there's Precious's mother,
Mm-hmm.
and Precious's grandmother.
Yep.
There's Precious has 2 children, Mongo and a little baby, and Precious's biological father, who's the partner, intermittent partner, for Precious's mom.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that's the profile of characters. We can see all of them. Black Lives Matter are oppressed. The neighborhood they live in, the shitty housing they have, the disinterested or useless social workers, the extreme poverty, the
Ineffective communication styles between each other.
problem-solving skills are zero. The acceptance or normalization of violence and microaggressions. Just layer after layer after layer. We see at one moment when Precious's mother is talking about her life story, we infer she also was sexually abused as a child. It's probable that her mother was sexually abused, whether from father or neighbor or grandpa. We know that in general, the statistics that feminists often talk about are 1 in 3 girls will be sexually abused by the age of 18, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the age of 18. That is amplified or intensified the more oppressions you have in your life, the more you live in crowded contexts where anybody can get away with anything and do anything to you.
The more trapped you are in poverty.
The more trapped you are in poverty, the more likely you'll be abused and abused multiple times. Said differently, Chelsea Clinton, it's unlikely she's going to get sexually abused, right? Super rich people, they have more protections and barriers, and the people who might consider abusing them will think that's not going to be an easy victim. In this documentary of Precious and her family, we can see they're perceived as easy victims. Precious, for example, at one point is just walking home, and we see some young guys on the street abusing her and harassing her. Would that happen with Chelsea Clinton? Not likely, right? She'd have security guards, right? She might be in a cab. She wouldn't even be walking in such a high-risk neighborhood. So I wanted just to reflect on all of those relationships, each of the clusters of identity pegs for each of those characters. So Mongo, the new little boy, Precious's mom, the grandma, the 2 social workers that we see for little episodes. Each of them has a whole bunch of identity pegs. Each of them has their own self-identified identity pegs and meanings and priorities and struggles and crises, and then the perceived ones. So to give another example of what I mean by perceived, we see near the beginning, we see Precious sitting there in class, and she's just kind of sitting there being what we might call a good student. She's sitting. She might perceive herself as in relationship with one of the male white teachers. Remember, she was kind of fantasizing about him. She perceives that he cares about her. He may be just treating her like any other student. He's treating her with respect and some civility, and for her that's like positive. So she's magnetized towards that positivity, right? So that would be the thing for us to explore. if she wished to explore that. The other thing that's really worth noting there, she's sitting in class. We later discover she can't even read. That's a problem. That's criminal neglect. That's structural criminal neglect. Whoever passed her, whoever the teachers were who continued to pass her, grade 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Knew that she couldn't read and just passed her along.
And passed her along. That's a type of criminal neglect. That's a structural oppression.
Mm-hmm.
That is an example of how crappy her school system is. Black Lives Matter. Would Chelsea Clinton have been able to go forward in school? No, she would have been identified as needing more support, more help, more coaching, more encouragement, more nurturance, right? All the people around her, her mom, her dad, her nanny, her tutors, they all would have supported her. We can see that Precious's mom didn't support her, didn't know how to support her. For all we know, Precious's mom can barely read and write herself. Mm-hmm. We have no evidence to the contrary at this moment, right? So, at first you think, well, how does that relate to a course on social work with victims of abuse? If you're a young woman and you can't read and write, you are economically vulnerable. You don't have the empowerment to stand up for yourself, which means predators are more likely to be able to take advantage of you, right? If you don't have a completed high school education, and you now have 2 children, and you're age 16, we can imagine the trajectory of your life.
Do you think that could be compared to First Nations people on reserves?
Definitely. That is exactly the parallel. That's why reflecting on all these, like Black Lives Matter, the whole horror and trauma of slavery and the long-term consequences of that, the whole taking of land from Indigenous people and all that's been done to them through the Catholic schools, through boarding schools, through all the legal systems, all these different ways that some groups of people have stolen from, oppressed, and hurt other groups of people. It definitely is layers and layers of abuse, and then it has consequences for who among us, as a species, who among us gets sexually assaulted, or sexually harassed, or beaten up by boyfriends, or who has to hitchhike instead of... Chelsea Clinton never has to hitchhike.
Yeah.
Right? Chelsea Clinton can always afford a cab. Here in northern BC, we have the whole Highway of Tears, which we'll focus on in another video. But definitely we can reflect on the more likely you are to hitchhike, or walk in scary areas of town, or walk with no one with you, or being perceived as that kind of girl that they can do something to and not get caught or not punished, the more likely you are to be victimized. Once you're victimized and your self-esteem has been corroded, the more you're likely to be victimized again, because you carry yourself in a way that perpetrators think they can get at you. Right? So not to say that you bring it on yourself, I want to be really clear about that, but sometimes what we see in the life story of a person
is that their self-perception matters.
Their
and impacts how they carry themselves in the world.
Exactly. So if you, a very common kind of story will be that somebody who was abused and oppressed can feel isolated and can feel shame and can feel not worth much, which can then tempt them to use drugs or alcohol or overeating or cutting or other ways of coping. And then that can lead to other problems. So someone who a 14-year-old girl who's been abused, who turns to drugs and alcohol, may then have to turn to prostitution or special boyfriends who will give her money for drugs and alcohol, which can then set her up if she's drinking or stoned. It's easier for a predator to access her and harm her, which can then
Yeah.
set her up to turn to more drugs and alcohol because she thinks, frig that, that's the third time in my life someone's beaten me up or sexually abused me. I must be worth not much, right? So for today, that's what I wanted to just start putting out there, that whole thing, intersectionality, a very, very key concept, the whole life cycle, all of our identity pegs, how they match. So it's not just to list them, it's what meaning do they have. If you're a rancher and I'm a vegan, and we're at a dinner party, this might have meaning. But if I'm also a bus driver and you're just a passenger on my bus, it is of no consequence. Right? You just get on the bus, get off the bus, I drive. But if I'm your social worker and I'm white and you perceive me as middle class and and you are black and you are very poor, right away between us, you might perceive me as someone who doesn't really care about you or doesn't really get your life. So before we get to, let's say, the deep, tangle, hurtful issues in your life, first we may need to talk about what can I do to help you trust me? And put that out there. And it's on me to put that out there, not on the client. The social worker could say, she never brought up the idea that I'm white and she's black, so... Well, no, she's not, because she feels afraid, or she feels shy, or she feels it subconsciously. Same if I was a male therapist and you're a female client, it's up to the male therapist to say, how does it feel for you to be talking about intimate, private parts of your life with a man? You might say, I don't know, it's not my first choice. Right? So we need to work that through, right? Not too long ago, just to give one more little example of that, not too long ago, my husband was very, very ill and he was in the hospital. And someone who was my student a few years before, a young male who's like 24, wanted to be my counselor. It's like, no, I don't think so. I didn't want to talk to him. I just didn't feel he would get my life. And in that moment and in that role, I'm crying. I'm heartbroken, right? I'm like a little sad baby. I was feeling like orphaned, right? I wanted to talk to a woman, and I wanted to talk to a woman who was in my age. And I did eventually talk to another social worker who was around my age, I just felt
more connected to?
I felt more connected to it. I didn't want to have to work hard
to have that same connection with someone that you could have easily or more easily come to with a different human that was more comfortable and
right, and she had not been my student, so it was just it was right away more comfortable. And it's on the client to make those choices in an ideal world, right? It's not on the therapist, right? Like, well, you're just going to have to talk to me. I don't care that I'm a 25-year-old white guy. You're going to have to talk to me about your feelings. No, I don't have to talk to you about my feelings. Right?
It's on us to be honest about what potential risks or problems we could see, but it's up on them to decide whether or not we're good for them.
Right. It's the client who should have the priority. It's their soul and their heart and their worldview that matters when we're doing social work with victims of abuse. So I think that covers what I wanted for us to kind of touch on in this particular one about Precious, Black Lives Matter, social work with victims of abuse. And thank you, Carlene, for being available to me today.
No problem.
And thank you, Steven Spielberg. And hope to see you again in a subsequent video.